Hi, WCCUSD community. My name is Sky Nelson. I'm a teacher and parent at El Cerrito High School. And I've been involved with the board meetings a lot, just going to meetings the last 8 months or so around the budget shortfalls that have been happening, and got really curious about verifying some of the stuff myself as I found some data on the website called Socrata. I think it's wccusd.socrata.com or something like that. Has all the budget information there for us to look at. And I want to share with someone what I found because it is important, I think, to understand what the accurate narrative is, because we get kind of incomplete pictures from different angles. And I want to show what I've seen as sort of the core facts that I can tell. And these have been verified by people I've talked to who've been in the district and know about this stuff pretty well. And what I'm going to show you is a picture, a story. I'm not a financial planner. I don't know how to properly account for the numbers. I'm a physics teacher, so I know how to do math. And but I want to tell a story more than anything else. Just paint a picture that is, I believe, accurate, regardless of the actual specifics. That might be a given year or a different year. So this is titled WCCUSD Budget Snapshot, FCMAT, which is an organization that regulates the budget, and a state organization, and SPED funding gap, or special ed education funding gap. Uh, my goals and the goals of this group in general are to create a common narrative, finding middle ground, common ground. And some of these, and the group is composed of parents and teachers and students from around the district, and not just one school, but the whole WCCUSD, not just one community, but all the communities. And some of these goals have been true for many years, and these issues have been true for many years or decades. So this is not new stuff that I'm pointing out. The place we're at right now is probably very specific to now, but the trends have been happening for a long time. Our goal is to share historical information to show that these outcomes are not a mystery. I feel frustrated when I'm in meetings and it seems like there's a mystery in the air and nobody knows what's really going on. And I think that the facts have to exist. So what we're doing is trying to illustrate what are the facts, so we're not surprised. And we have relied on documents from the school board website, the FCMAT, FCMAT website, California Department of Education, and numerous veterans of the WCCUSD community. These numbers are ballpark. They're for simplicity, but they tell an accurate story. I believe, pretty sure. So our goal is to correct systems, not people, by finding a common narrative we can agree on. So we approach it, and I approach it always from the sense of everyone's doing their best in the framework that they are working in, and we're trying to find where's the disconnect between our different frameworks, not who's wrong and who's right, but how do we work better together in the systems. So to start with the timeline and the history, because the context is very important for understanding the nuances of why we have the deficits that we have right now. In 1991, WCCUSD was the first in the state to take out a loan to go into receivership with the state. The receivership took 2000 till 2012 to get paid off. That's 21 years. So we were under the very close watchful eye of the state for that time, with the people actually in our office, the school board overseeing the school board from outside our county. And then we were paid it off, so we were not being watched in the same way for a while. In 2020, the austerity flags, the red flags, were re-triggered um, because of three um, uh, what they call qualified reports in a row, financial reports in a row. The third of those happened to be after the pandemic began. So there's important note to make that when you have a situation that has any overlap with a global issue, it's a systemic problem, right? It's not necessarily pointing to our local problem or mismanagement of funds. Now, as part of a train of those three in a row, but we do need to recognize that there's this overlap with the global situation. And I think it's important to go back and revise history now that we know what that was all about and the huge impact it had on everybody, and say, look, there's some of what happened And this 2020 was not created by ourselves only. And so the downstream effect of that austerity and that being under the watchful eye of FICMAT regulators is a result partly of that coincidence with the pandemic and the effects of that. And our risk score was under the 40% threshold at that time, but we were automatically triggered for red flag because of this thing with the three conditional financial reports. So that's a important point. It doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't have had a different situation if it had not been for COVID, but it's definitely part of the factor, or it could be. And I think we need to account for that and at least know that that's the case. Then we had one-time COVID funds come in and temporarily stabilize our budgets. In 2023, we had another string of three reports that were conditional or sorry, qualified. The county issued what's called a lack of going concern letter, which basically put us triggered back into the repair mode, the watchful eye of the state. And the result of these austerity measures or these flags, what I've heard called austerity measures, maybe I shouldn't use that term, are waivers. It's important to recognize that the law requires that the authorities, like the county superintendent, take an action. One of those actions is allow waivers and take over some of the management of the budget or reject certain budget if they don't meet certain requirements. And so there's not a fault, I think, to be placed on an individual judgment call from a person, but the system itself is requiring us, because of these automatic triggers, one of which happened to fall during COVID, to undergo these measures, like the waivers that were passed to bypass classroom funding minimum requirements and pay less on classrooms than statewide required by the state. So this tells a story that's important, which is that the system is really inflexible to our needs in a way that I think, situations that have occurred, including the pandemic. And as a result, we've been under the gun for quite some time trying to keep ourselves from being negatively affected by these trends. And after the pandemic, the special education needs also became more pronounced post-COVID. Costs have risen in what seems to be a permanent change. So again, I'm trying to tell a story here that illustrates that there's not a mystery that we're struggling financially. And here's where some specifics. So the total SPED program, special education current budget actuals, these are close. They're not actually posted on the website, but I'm drawing also from being at the meeting last week and past years as well. So the total SPED program cost is around 120 million. The IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act of federal government, provides us revenue every year of around $8 million for IDEA, which is about 7% of the total 120 million. There are some COVID funds or something else that's federal funds in the document that I couldn't quite know what it was, but it's counted also towards these federal contributions, 17 million. So that's a total of 25 million from the federal government out of 120. The result is we pay the rest out of our unrestricted funds, which is the funds that we have choice over, what we can pay, various aspects of our budget towards that we can choose. We have to put a lot of that towards the SPED, special education, unfunded costs that we've created for these students it's very important in our district that we emphasize special ed students are mainstream students first, and they often require accommodations or needs that we want to make sure they have that cost extra money above the standard average. So we put in last year $92.5 million above the federal contribution to make sure that happened. And so that's a large number. And IDEA is originally passed with a 40% aspirational target contribution from the federal government. The idea is that the feds would pay 40% of the difference in cost between the ADA contribution from the state and the cost of educating the special ed program. But it's not a legal requirement. It goes up and down, and it's stayed pretty close to around 7% versus 40%. 7% of total, which is a little different. There's some nuances here, which I'm not sure we'll get too into, but point is, it's quite a large gap. Here you see the special ed contributions for 22, 23. You have entitlement funds of 5,400,000, discretionary grants of 1,900,000. Down below, you see the all other federal revenue of 17.5 million. Sorry, I said thousands, I meant millions. 5.54 million, 1.9 million, 17.6 million. Those are the numbers I gave you a minute ago. So the per student costs, if you just think about it this way, this is illustrative. This is not necessarily the way to do the math, but the LCFF funding formula for average daily attendance is about $12,500 per student per year, just for some context. And if you have 5,000 total SPED students in the district, 120 million divided by 5,000 is about $24,000 per SPED student per year. Now, that's obviously more than the average, and that's the point of getting these federal funds and putting money into these programs. And this is where we're putting in more than our share because the federal government is not putting in their full share. And that's, I think, an important piece. Not because we should do it differently, but because we need to understand it's not a mystery. Like this is what's been happening for a long time. Federal government does not meet their end of the bargain, and we're putting in more money than we have budgeted. And it's important work. So the question I have here is, shouldn't FCMAT, this organization that regulates us, want to address this systemic structural challenge rather than just penalize us? If they understand what's going on, and it's not mismanagement, as far as I can tell so far, on the part of the local authorities. So that's a concern I have in terms of the structure of the regulation oversight. And what 40% of the extra cost would mean if we were fully funded by the federal government. Just running through the numbers above for the previous slides, the extra cost is about 57 million. If funded as promised at 40%, that would be 26 million versus 8 million now. So we'd have an estimated increase of about $18 million annually. It's illustrative. I don't claim that that's correct, but somewhere in the ballpark of tens of millions of dollars that we are not paid every single year by the federal government. That was part of the plan of that law that we are it's not budgeted for, or it shouldn't be budgeted for if it was supposed to be paid by the federal government. So to check the scale of that and against the recent cuts, the annual IDEA underpayment is around the tens of millions of dollars. The 1991 bailout loan that we paid heavily for in interest and time and sacrifices was $29 million. So in just a couple of years of underpayment for IDEA, we would be making up more than the 29 million that we borrowed many years ago. So that's an incredible scale there. And the recent cuts we've argued over this year in the district are 7 million plus 6 million over 2 years, much less than the funding gap every year, just from the federal government. And renewing the parcel tax that we will be trying to do this year is $10 million a year. Again, it's amazing to me that there's this outstanding issue of the federal government not paying their part to our program, us covering that and being under budget every year by more than the amounts we're being dinged for, for the cuts and for the cushion that we're supposed to have in reserves. If we go under the cushion by $7 million, that's a problem. But we're being underfunded by, I think I said 18 million every year, let's say. So it just paints a story of what I would call a double standard. The bottom line policy questions that I have are chronic SPED underfunding by Fed and oversight triggers by state. Both strain the general fund, the lack of flexibility by the state, and the fact that we're underfunded by the Fed ongoing. And that's a problem. The combination of those two is very difficult for us to get out from under the weight of. We need to define a clear off-ramp from high-risk status. We've been sort of in the concern about being flagged for deficit spending for a long time. We should forgive the automatic trigger during COVID. I'm not sure if that had a fiscal impact, but it would be important to correct the record. We should encourage thorough evaluation of causes. So, for instance, in special education, is FICMA helping to solve the problem or just penalizing us? Are they really analyzing why we're undergoing the deficit spending? Or are they just saying, you figure this out. We're going to take over control of your financial choices in the meantime. And rejecting the takeover mentality that there are people out there who can come in to take over control of our budgetary decisions when we have systemic issues, not mismanagement issues. So the idea that there should be, I would say these waivers are a result of the takeover of the mistake. Sorry, the trigger is the word I'm looking for from the under qualified reports. Again, rejecting the takeover mentality that they should just come in and tell us what to do. And aligning budget timelines, layoffs, interim reports, and grants all come at different times. Layoffs are in notices are in the spring, or actually in March. Interim reports come throughout the year in June, for instance, and the grants often come through in the late summer. And so the alignment of these incomes and outgoings don't align. And we're supposed to keep a steady budget and reserve layer of 3% all the time. It's pretty hard to do that. So the core problem is a double standard. We're being dinged for occasional budget infractions of only several millions of dollars against our cushion. We're regularly covering costs for federally mandated programs up to several tens of millions of dollars. So in essence, I would say we are owed tens of millions of dollars by the federal government every year, but we're falling short by several million dollars, and that's a double standard. Even if we don't change the result in the federal government or even the state government, knowing that this is the situation for our local community is important because it helps us have more compassion for the situation and understand each other better, meet at a common narrative so we understand, we agree on what's happening, and then can make decisions from there. So I think our response should be to stop infighting, do what we can to come together. Don't spend time debating the numbers, even though I've done some of that here, or the history of FICMAT. We don't need to worry about the past. What do we need now? What regulation do we need now? What should the state policy be now moving forward? More flexibility, more trusted local governments, more focus on the student outcomes. And unite the community and turn towards Sacramento and DC. We can change our funding policy for ADA or any other things that we find to be the key elements of giving districts more control over their finances and less blame for systemic problems that exist in the communities and in the country. And build coalitions. The city councils, we need you to get involved. Other districts like Oakland and Vallejo that have been through this. State leaders like Thurman, Joya, and Wicks. Congress, DeSaulnier and Garamendi. And CTA, CSBA, CCC Health Department. All these organizations are part of this, affected by the situation in our schools. And we can come together and turn towards the policy issues in DC and Washington and in Sacramento and make change there. And then, of course, at home, we're going to do our work as teachers and as administrators and as parents to make sure our schools are running smoothly as well. So I wanted to make sure to share that with you because it's important to me that we have a common narrative or that we can agree on certain baseline contextual things. And if those are incorrect, let's talk about it. Please let me know. That's what I've discovered myself. And as a curious person, I wanted to share that with others to get on the same page. Thank you. Have a great day.